Carl Jung uncovered what might be the most effective way an empath can respond to gaslighting. And it's probably not what you think. It's not collecting receipts. It's not improving your communication. And it certainly isn't about getting the other person to finally see the truth. Jung's insight feels counterintuitive at first, but it strips the manipulator of their power instantly. Back in 1921, Jung was working with a patient, let's call her Sophia, who had spent 3 agonizing years trying to prove her reality to her husband. Their marriage had turned into a war of memory. He denied entire conversations, reneged on promises, and claimed she was imagining things. In response, Sophia began chronicling everything. She kept journals, archived letters, noted times and dates with military precision. Her goal was simple. If she could present enough proof, her husband would have to acknowledge the truth, and they could finally move forward. But the more evidence she collected, the more he insisted she was unwell. The more meticulous she became, the more he called her paranoid. Over time, Sophia began to question not just him, but herself. She lay awake night after night, replaying conversations, wondering whether her own memory had betrayed her. By the time she sat down with Jung, she was mentally unraveling. What Jung told her cut through the fog. "You're not losing your mind," he said. "You're losing a game you were never meant to win." This wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't even about truth. What Sophia was enduring was a psychological trapone where her greatest strengths as an empath had been weaponized against her. Empaths are naturally driven to seek understanding, to clarify misunderstanding, to connect through shared truth. But manipulators, like Sophia's husband, twist these qualities. They use them as a tool to control the narrative, not clarify it. The more the empath pushes for clarity, the more entangled they become. Jung recognized that Sophia had walked straight into what he later conceptualized as the gaslighting trap. At its core, gaslighting is not a misunderstanding between two people with differing perceptions. It's a deliberate distortion of reality meant to destabilize one party and maintain control. Sophia believed that her reality would win if she could just prove it. But Jung knew something deeper. This was never a fair game. Her husband didn't lack proof. He wasn't confused. He was invested in denying her truth because it gave him power. Every time Sophia tried to validate her experience, she handed him that power once again. This dynamic, where evidence becomes ammunition against the empath, isn't just emotionally draining, it's neurologically disorienting. Neuroscientist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains that this kind of psychological manipulation causes what's known as cognitive dissonance overload. The brain receives 2 conflicting realities, one you lived and one you're being told happened. It can't hold both as true, so it has to choose. For empaths, especially those conditioned from childhood to value others' perspectives over their own, the brain often chooses the relationship over reality. This internal fracture is what makes gaslighting so dangerous. It's not just that your memory is under attack. It's that your sense of self begins to splinter. By trying to prove she wasn't crazy, Sophia ended up looking crazier. Her husband labeled her journaling obsessive. Her detailed records became proof that she was unstable. And every effort she made to explain her experience only deepened the trap. Jung saw the pattern clearly. The only way to win was to stop playing. When Sophia arrived at Jung's practice in Zurich, she carried with her a mountain of evidence, 3 years' worth of diaries, letters, transcripts of conversations, and broken promises. She believed with every fiber of her being that once she laid out the proof, her husband would have no choice but to admit the truth. "If I can just show him everything," she said, "he'll have to see him right." But Jung saw through this illusion immediately. He knew she was engaged in a battle that could never be won. Because her husband wasn't participating in good faith. He wasn't misremembering. He was manipulating. This is what makes the gaslighting trap so sinister. It's not about the facts. It's about control. The manipulator isn't looking for clarity. They're counting on confusion. They aren't trying to get to the bottom of a misunderstanding. They're using your efforts to do so as proof that you're unstable. Sophia didn't understand that yet. She kept trying to fix the situation by doing what empaths do best: gathering, organizing, explaining. She was acting from her core belief that connection comes through understanding, that once someone sees your heart, they'll meet you with truth. But Jung understood something she didn't. The gaslighter doesn't want clarity. They want control over the narrative, and by extension, control over you. When Sophia presented her evidence, she assumed it would be received with openness. Instead, her husband told her the records were obsessive, that she was paranoid, and that normal people don't document every interaction with their spouse. Her proof, meant to liberate her, became a weapon used to imprison her. This is the first trap empaths fall into, believing that enough evidence will eventually crack through the denial. But denial isn't a misunderstanding. It's a strategy. Jung knew that people like Sophia's husband don't deny reality because they're confused or misinformed. They deny it because it serves them. It maintains their power. It keeps the other person, usually the empath, in a state of confusion and dependence. Every journal entry Sophia wrote became another opportunity for her husband to say, "You're crazy." Every letter she saved became another excuse for him to question her sanity. The harder she fought to prove her point, the deeper she sank. Jung recalled another patient with a similar experience. This woman had recorded her conversations with her manipulative partner, only to be told she had edited them. The exact words he had spoken were used as evidence of her psychosis. What was once undeniable proof became a weapon to discredit her entirely. Even Sylvia Plath, the brilliant poet, kept meticulous records of her relationship with Ted Hughes. These journals, meant to preserve her truth and record his betrayals, were later used as evidence of her instability. After her death, Hughes took control of her literary estate and destroyed many of her personal writings. The very thing she hoped would protect her reality ended up buried with her. This is what Dr. Jennifer Freed refers to in her research on Darvo: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. When you bring evidence to a manipulator, you can expect 3 steps. First, they deny. Then, they attack you for bringing it up. Finally, they flip the script. They're the victim now, and you're the aggressor. Sophia lived this cycle repeatedly. She would confront her husband with facts. He'd accuse her of harassment. She'd try to explain. He'd say she was mentally unstable. Then he'd claim she was abusing him emotionally by being so controlling. To an empath, this makes no sense. How could truth be seen as aggression? But to a manipulator, truth is dangerous. It threatens the illusion they've worked so hard to maintain. So they frame your clarity as cruelty. Your evidence becomes their proof that you are the problem. The trap deepens because empaths often believe documentation equals accountability. But when you're dealing with someone who's playing by an entirely different set of rules, the rules don't matter. You're not proving reality. You're playing into their hands. Jung told Sophia, "You're not crazy for keeping records, but you're giving those records to someone who will only ever use them against you." After evidence failed, Sophia turned to her next instinctive strategy, explaining, if proof didn't work, maybe clarity would. She shifted from showing her journals to trying new ways of communicating, different phrases, new analogies, softer tones. Anything that might finally get through to her husband. If I can just explain it clearly enough, she thought, he'll understand. He'll see how much this hurts me. He'll realize what he's doing. Empaths are natural explainers. They are wired to believe that misunderstandings can be mended with enough dialogue, that confusion can be cleared through the right words. Sophia fell deeply into this pattern. She spoke for hours, sometimes through tears, sometimes in carefully structured sentences. She rehearsed what to say beforehand. She dissected his words afterward. Every explanation, she hoped, would be the one that opened his eyes. But every time she explained, her husband simply replied with some version of, "You're remembering it wrong," or "I understand that you feel that way." But feelings don't equal facts. It was maddening. He used therapeutic language, the vocabulary of emotional intelligence, to undermine her reality. "I'm not saying you're lying," he would insist. "I'm just saying that your memory is distorted." Another one of Jung's patients faced a more refined version of the same tactic. Her partner would say, "I care about you too much to validate a false memory." Or, "I know this is hard for you, but I can't pretend something happened that didn't." It was reality distortion, wrapped in compassion. A gaslight delivered with a gentle voice and sad eyes. The damage was the same. Modern psychology has since confirmed what Jung understood intuitively. The explanation trap depletes your mental energy. Dr. Shannon Thomas, in her work on psychological abuse, explains that repeated attempts to explain your experience to someone committed to denial exhaust the brain. You go into overdrive trying to resolve the contradiction between what you feel and what they claim. This cognitive overload creates a focus state where your ability to trust yourself begins to break down. Sophia found herself circling the same arguments again and again. One day he would deny a promise he made. She'd spend hours unpacking it. The next day, he'd deny a conversation. She'd go back to her records, try to explain again. Every cycle left her more drained, more confused. And every time she thought they'd reached clarity, he'd shift the narrative once more. This isn't accidental. Manipulators benefit from the confusion. Your effort to explain becomes a distraction from the real issue. They don't have to reflect on their actions or take responsibility because you're too busy proving your version of reality. It's like trying to build a bridge while the other person is secretly removing bricks behind you. Jung helped Sophia see what was really happening. The longer you explain, the deeper you sink. Manipulators are not interested in understanding. They're interested in maintaining control. By keeping you talking, they keep you engaged, invested. and emotionally spent. This tactic serves three insidious purposes. It wears you down emotionally. It keeps you hoping that change is possible. It prevents you from acting on what you already know. Sophia often left these conversations with a pounding headache, a tight chest, and 1,000 self-doubts. Maybe I said it wrong. She'd think maybe I was too emotional. She became so focused on how to phrase things perfectly that she stopped asking whether the other person was even trying to listen. This was no longer communication. It was a form of psychological self-destruction. Jung pointed her to the writings of Zelda Fitzgerald, another woman who doubted her mind under the weight of a distorted reality. Zelda's husband, F. Scott Fitzgerald, would routinely dismiss her concerns, deny his affairs, and accuse her of being mentally unstable. Eventually, he had her institutionalized multiple times, and Zelda began to believe him. Her journal entries reveal a woman torn apart by self-doubt, wondering if her perception of reality had any value at all. Sophia, too, had started asking herself the same questions. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I really am too sensitive. That inner spiral of doubt is the third trap, and it's the most dangerous one of all. The third trap, the self-doubt spiral, is the final stage before emotional collapse. It's where manipulation doesn't just distort your sense of the past. It starts to fracture your identity. For Sophia, after years of being told she was paranoid, sensitive, unstable, the voice of her husband became internalized. She no longer needed him to question her perception. She began doing it to herself. This is the most insidious part of gaslighting. It convinces you that you are the problem. It's no longer about one conversation or one disagreement. It becomes a complete break between your experiences and your confidence in them. You feel something and immediately question, am I overreacting? Did I imagine that? Is it me? Jung understood this not just as psychological distress, but as a kind of dissociation. Sophia was no longer in full contact with her own experiences. When something upsetting happened, her first response wasn't to trust her feelings, but to interrogate them. Did I interpret that correctly? Was I too emotional? What if I misunderstood again? She had started living life in reverse, experiencing moments, then doubting them, then trying to explain or prove them, all while never actually trusting herself. Research into betrayal trauma supports this experience. When the person distorting your reality is someone you're attached to, especially a partner, parent, or close friend, the brain faces a painful choice. Trust your perception or preserve the relationship. For many empaths, particularly those with childhood patterns of invalidation, the brain chooses the relationship. It's less painful in the short term to believe, maybe I'm wrong, than to accept that someone you love is deliberately hurting you. But the cost is enormous. Sophia began to second-guess everything. She'd relive conversations repeatedly, scanning for any hint of error on her part. She examined her tone, her word choice, her body language. She even questioned her own emotional reaction. Was she being dramatic? Was crying an overreaction? Was silence a form of manipulation? This constant self-surveillance is not self-awareness. It's self-erasure. You start shrinking yourself to avoid triggering someone else's denial. You abandon your own perceptions for the sake of preserving peace. Jung called this a loss of psychic sovereignty, the loss of your own inner authority. Sophia's reality had become entirely dependent on how her husband interpreted it. If he said it didn't happen, she doubted it. If he said she was unstable, she feared he was right. If he claimed to be the victim, she wondered if she was unknowingly abusive. This spiral kept her trapped, not because she didn't know the truth deep down, but because the cost of trusting herself seemed too high. But here's the paradox. Staying in the game doesn't preserve the relationship. It destroys you. The longer you participate, the more fractured you become. The more you try to prove your sanity, the more unstable you appear. The more you try to fix the communication, the more you delay facing the real issue. Manipulation is not miscommunication, it's control. At her lowest point, Sophia confided to Jung, I don't know if I can trust anything I think or feel anymore. Her voice shook when she said it, not from sadness, but from terror. To not trust your own mind is to float in psychological limbo. It's like living without gravity. Nothing feels grounded, not even yourself. That's when Jung knew she was ready. She had exhausted all three traps. The evidence trap, believing proof would force change. The explanation trap, believing understanding would bring connection. The self-doubt spiral, believing she was the problem. Now, he could teach her the only strategy that actually works. Strategic withdrawal from the reality negotiation. It's the most powerful empath response to gaslighting, not because it wins the argument, but because it removes you from the argument entirely. In their third session together, Jung gave Sophia a directive that challenged everything she believed about healing, about communication, and about relationships. Stop trying to convince him. Stop gathering evidence. Stop explaining. In fact, stop discussing reality with him altogether. Sophia was stunned. But if I don't defend myself, he wins, she said. He gets to define reality. Jung shook his head gently. He already defines reality for himself. The question is whether you'll allow him to define it for you. This moment marked a turning point. Jung wasn't asking Sophia to ignore reality. He was asking her to own it, to stop negotiating her lived experience with someone who had no interest in meeting her there. This wasn't retreat. It was reclaiming power. He introduced her to what he called strategic withdrawal, a deliberate, conscious choice to disengage from debates about what happened. This was not the same as silence from fear or avoidance. It was the refusal to let her perception be treated as up for debate. The power of this technique lies in one simple truth. The gaslighting game requires your participation. It needs you to defend, explain, and prove yourself. Without your engagement, the manipulator has no material to work with. Jung coached Sophia to shift her journaling practice. Instead of writing with the intent of proving her case, she would now write to affirm her reality for herself. Don't write for him, he said. Write for you, not to convince anyone, but to anchor your own truth. Her journal transformed. It was no longer a courtroom exhibit. It became a compass, a tool of internal grounding, a record that said, "This happened. I felt it. I experienced it. That's real." The next time her husband denied a conversation, Sophia tried something different. Instead of diving into her notes or trying to remember the exact words, she simply said, "I know what I experienced. I'm not discussing this further." And then she said nothing more. He pushed. "You're doing it again, making things up." She repeated, "I know what I experienced. This conversation is over." He escalated. "This is insane. You can't just walk away from this." She stood up and left the room. Everything in her wanted to scream, to present the evidence, to demand validation. But she didn't. She refused the debate. And this is where the shift begins. When you decline to defend your perception, you're not being passive. You're asserting that your experience is not up for auction. You're saying, "This is my truth, and I don't need your permission to believe it." Key phrases became her new armor. "I know what I experienced. I'm not discussing this further. You're free to believe what you want. I know what happened. This conversation is over." And most importantly, silence, not defensive silence, not sulking silence, but sovereign silence, the kind that says, "I don't owe you a debate about my reality." Over the course of several weeks, Sophia continued using this strategy. Every time her husband denied something, she anchored herself with those phrases and walked away. She didn't try to win him over. She didn't try to control his narrative. She just stopped engaging in the game. By the fourth month, something profound happened. She stopped waiting for his confession. She no longer needed him to admit he was wrong to feel right about her experience. And because of that, she started making decisions based on what she knew, not what he would admit. She moved into a separate bedroom. She opened a new bank account. She declined to attend events with him. And most importantly, she began planning her exit strategy not out of spite, but from clarity. Her husband was stunned. "You can't do this without talking to me," Sophia replied. "I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you." This wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was clarity in motion. She wasn't waiting for his approval to reclaim her life. Sophia's decision to withdraw from the debate didn't just shift the dynamic, it dismantled it. Her husband, no longer able to bait her into arguments, escalated his behavior. Jung had warned her this would happen. "When you stop playing," he said, "they will push harder. That's not a sign to retreat, it's a sign you're doing it right." In the second month of her withdrawal, her husband's tactics grew more aggressive. He shifted from denial to emotional manipulation. "You're being cold," he said. "You're punishing me with silence. This is emotional abuse." These weren't concerns. They were strategies, last-ditch efforts to re-engage her in the game. Jung had prepared her for this phase. He called it tactical escalation. When a manipulator senses they are losing control, they often intensify their behavior to trigger your reactivity. The goal is to make you feel guilty, to make you doubt your integrity, to pull you back into defense mode. Sophia held the line. She repeated her grounding phrases. She wrote in her journal. She walked away when the conversation turned manipulative. And though it felt like standing in a storm without shelter, she didn't fold. By the third month, her husband activated his flying monkeys, a term used in psychology to describe people recruited by the manipulator to do their bidding. He reached out to friends and family, saying he was worried about Sophia's mental health, that she was acting strangely, that she refused to communicate. He painted himself as the victim. Soon, calls started coming in. Friends expressed concern. Some hinted she should just talk it out with him. Others said maybe he's not doing it intentionally. It would have been easy for Sophia to second-guess herself, but Jung reminded her, anyone who pressures you to doubt yourself needs you to stay small. Let them go. Some relationships fell away, but Sophia found peace in that loss. If her clarity cost her connections that depended on her confusion, it was a price she was willing to pay. By month 4, her actions began to reflect her truth entirely. She no longer tailored her decisions to avoid conflict. She didn't wait for arguments to end before making choices. She simply acted based on what she knew. She moved permanently into the guest room. She opened a private savings account. She stopped pretending. At dinner parties, she no longer smiled to keep up appearances. She existed in her truth, even when it made others uncomfortable. Her husband was bewildered. "You can't just act like this never happened," he insisted. "We have to talk." Sophia responded with calm finality. "I'm done debating reality. I've made my decision." Each step she took wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an act of sanity. For years, she had waited for a confession, a reckoning, a moment of mutual clarity. But clarity never came. And now she realized she didn't need it. Her husband's denial didn't have to dictate her actions. This is the essence of the most powerful empath response. It's not a mic drop. It's not revenge. It's not even closure. It's the radical decision to live in your own reality, regardless of who validates it. Sophia accepted something that used to terrify her. Her husband might never admit the truth. He might deny their history until the end, but his denial no longer required her participation. And it certainly didn't require her permission. Instead of fighting for acknowledgement, she started building a life where self-trust was enough. And this was the most devastating blow to the manipulator's control. Not anger, not confrontation, but disengagement. He could no longer use her defensiveness as proof of instability. He could no longer bait her with denial. He was left alone with his version of reality, and she had moved on. Not in confusion, not in doubt, but with clarity and sovereignty. As Sophia's withdrawal from the gaslighting game continued, the manipulative pattern followed a predictable descent. Jung had outlined the stages manipulators typically cycle through once they lose control: confusion, escalation, rage, bargaining, and finally, a smear campaign. Sophia witnessed them all. After confusion and emotional manipulation failed, her husband entered the rage stage. He couldn't comprehend how Sophia no longer responded with desperation, explanations, or pleas. He lashed out with wild accusations: infidelity, deceit, betrayal. "You're cheating on me," he accused. "You're turning everyone against me. You're trying to destroy this family." The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. These were projections, accusations rooted not in her actions, but in his panic over losing the upper hand. She stayed anchored. "I know what I experienced," she repeated. "This conversation is over." Then came the bargaining. "Let's talk like adults. We don't have to fight. We can work this out. Just tell me what I need to say to fix this." But Sophia knew the script too well. These weren't sincere efforts to help, they were bids to pull her back into the game, to re-establish a dynamic where his version of reality dominated. When bargaining didn't work, he moved to the smear campaign. He began telling mutual acquaintances that Sophia was emotionally unstable, that she was shutting down for no reason, that he feared for her mental health. Classic Darvo again: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. But Sophia was prepared. Jung had warned her, the more your silence disrupts their control, the louder they will scream. But it's not your job to silence them. It's your job to remain grounded in your truth. And so she did. She lost more friends. Some chose his version of events. Others remained neutral, unwilling to take sides. But just a few stood by her. These were the ones who had witnessed her pain, who didn't need an explanation to trust her intuition. Sophia realized that quality always trumps quantity when it comes to support systems. By the 6th month, Sophia had achieved something more powerful than escape clarity without confusion. She no longer questioned whether she had tried hard enough. She no longer wondered if she was too emotional or sensitive or difficult. She had given 3 years of her life to a man who used her empathy against her, and she had finally stopped handing him that power. "I know what I saw," she told Jung in their final session. "I know what I felt." His denial doesn't erase that. It doesn't even touch it. And that was the breakthrough. Gaslighting only works when the target agrees to participate in the reality distortion. The manipulator says, "This didn't happen," and the empath replies, "Yes, it did," and the spiral begins. But when the empath says, "I know what happened, and I'm not debating it," the spiral collapses. The withdrawal removes the fuel, without defensiveness to frame as instability, without explanations to twist into paranoia, without attempts to prove truth. The manipulator is left in a vacuum, and often that vacuum reveals their true nature. Some will rage, some will beg, most will never admit the truth. Because for manipulators, truth is not the goal, control is. Sophia no longer needed her husband's confession to validate her experience. She didn't require a mutual understanding or a peaceful resolution. She had her perception, and that was enough. This was not coldness. This was liberation. Jung reminded her, you can't build clarity with someone who needs your confusion. The relationship may not survive your truth, but you will. And that was the final truth Sophia embraced. Not every relationship is meant to survive, especially not the ones that demand the sacrifice of your self-trust. 6 months after leaving her husband, Sophia sat in Jung's office with a new struggle. I'm finally free of him, she said, but I'm still not free of the doubt. Her voice, calm but heavy, carried the weight of a woman who had escaped the cage, but not the echoes inside it. I question everything I feel, she admitted, even small things. I ask myself, did I really see that? Did I overreact? Was that person actually being rude? Or am I just sensitive again? I don't want to go back, but I'm scared I'll never fully trust myself. Jung smiled gently. This, he told her, was the final stage of healing, rebuilding the bridge between yourself and your own perception. Because gaslighting doesn't just shatter your relationship with the manipulator, it shatters the relationship with yourself. You've spent years, he said, learning to doubt your primary source of truth, your experience. Now, we begin the process of integration. He taught her to start small. Don't begin with big decisions or emotionally loaded situations. Begin with sensations. I feel cold right now, she would think, then pause and say to herself, yes, that's true. I'm hungry. Pause. Yes, I trust that. I didn't like how that person spoke to me. Pause. Yes, I believe that response. These tiny validations rewired her brain. It wasn't about proving the world wrong. It was about reminding her body that it still had a voice, and that voice mattered. She continued journaling, but now it wasn't to preserve evidence. It was to affirm her reality. Today this happened. I felt this way. That feeling is valid. Her journal became a record of trust, a quiet testament to her awakening self-belief. With time, Sophia found she could identify her emotions without defaulting to analysis. She could say, I'm angry, and trust it. She could feel repelled by someone's energy and not explain it away. These weren't acts of defiance. They were acts of wholeness. She also joined a support group for survivors of emotional manipulation. For the first time, she spoke her truth and was met with affirmation, not analysis. Yes, that happened. Yes, you saw it clearly. Yes, you're not crazy. Being around people who didn't question her reality became medicine. These weren't people who said, well, maybe he didn't mean it like that. They were people who said, I believe you. And that was everything. Jung also taught her to tune into her body's wisdom. When your mind is doubting, the body often still remembers. What did you feel in your chest? He asked. When he denied something you knew was true. Tightness, she answered, like I couldn't breathe. And what did you feel? He asked. When you trusted your experience and walked away. Relief, she whispered, like I could breathe again. The body doesn't lie. Sophia learned to trust the somatic signals: tension, nausea, chest constriction as early warnings. Her body had been sounding the alarm long before her mind was ready to hear it. And over time, with patience and consistency, she began to rebuild internal sovereignty. Not the rigid kind that swears. You'll never be fooled again, that's still trauma talking. No, Sophia embraced a gentler power. I can trust myself to know what I know. And one day, she said something that marked the end of her transformation. For 3 years, she said, I thought I needed him to believe me in order for my experience to be real. But now, I understand I don't need anyone else to believe me. I believe me, and that's enough. The most powerful response to gaslighting isn't a clever retort, a perfectly timed clapback, or even standing your ground in an explosive confrontation. It's something far deeper, far quieter, and far more liberating. It's the decision to trust your perception so completely that no amount of denial can shake it. It's the courage to withdraw from the debate, not as an act of surrender, but as a declaration. My reality is not negotiable. It's the act of living according to what you know, and if the other person never admits it, never apologizes, never acknowledges the harm. Because that's what truly removes the gaslighter's power, not defeating them in argument, but refusing to play their game. You didn't survive psychological distortion to spend the rest of your life in self-doubt. You survived it to learn what Carl Jung taught Sophia. Your perception is the ground you stand on. No one can take that ground unless you hand it to them. The most powerful empath response: keep your ground.